Radio Deplorable with Dave Carter, that poet of the highways, that Proust of the Peterbilt, that Hemingway of the highway. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Carter.
He's Ricochet's editor-in-chief. John Gabriel's with us. That's right, folks. The boss man is here. Everyone, please, look busy. This is Radio Deplorable, sponsored by Ricochet.com and by the great people over at Quip, who have single-handedly revolutionized dental hygiene and the efficient care of your tufas, and we'll learn more about that in a little while. But first, I am Dave Carter. I'm a retired military veteran with 3 tours of duty in the Middle East, 1 year of fun and adventure in Korea, and numerous deployments all over creation. I'm a former private detective, a radio show host, a cross-country 18-wheeler driver with over 1 million miles logged across the country, in addition to being a contributor here at Ricochet and occasionally writing columns over at the Federalist and Conservative Review. My guest is the guy who rides herd over all the cool cats on Ricochet, the coolest of them being our members, naturally. In addition to his work as editor-in-chief of Ricochet.com, John Gabriel is a commentator on politics, culture, current events, and policy. His work having appeared in the Wall Street Journal and USA Today and the New York Post. He's a columnist for the Arizona Republic and the host of a superb podcast called The Conservatarians. He's been a guest on NPR, Fox News, Al Jazeera, The Blaze, and One America News. And he was the director of marketing for the Goldwater Institute and also helped spearhead marketing efforts for Honeywell and Cold Stone Creamery. As an aside, his efforts for Cold Stone Creamery earning my and my wife's respect and affection for the remainder of our days here on Earth. But most importantly, he's the undisputed and self-proclaimed king of stuff over on Twitter, where he has, I guess, approximately 11 bazillion followers. And by the way, if you see someone posing for a photo with a coffee cup in front of their face, it's John's fault. And it's a pleasure to welcome him to Radio Deplorable. Good morning, John. How are you, sir?
Good morning. Great to be on, Dave.
What's the story behind that coffee cup photo, or is there a story behind it?
There isn't much of a story, but I do have a coffee cup in front of my face right now with my favorite Peixoto coffee, local shout out to my local bean producer. But I was in Chicago at the smugly named Intelligentsia Coffee. They don't serve cups of coffee. They serve smugs of coffee.
That's right, yes, right.
They do smugs. But my wife took a picture of me sipping my coffee. And when I started on Twitter and really started blogging, I had this little group blog with a couple buddies of mine. We began our midlife crisis by blogging. And I was semi-anonymous because I worked for all these different companies, like I said, Cold Stone and a few different tech firms. And a lot of those environments you're dealing with mostly left-of-center management. So I just went by John. So when I got on Twitter, I was the blog was called Exurban League because we were all out in the exurbs, grilling burgers, etc. And, installing sprinkler systems. And so I was Exurban John, then space being a priority on Twitter, especially in the early days. I just shortened it to X John. Okay. And it just kind of stuck. So I was kind of semi-anonymous. It's like, there's a person here. I'm not, I just didn't want the American flag Abbey or the Screeching Eagle. So I just covered up my face. The thing is, once I fully came out, started using my full name, I would change my picture to my actual face, and people would recoil in horror. No, we need the coffee cup picture. Coffee cup picture. So I went, wow, okay. I guess it's the severe facial scarring around my mouth maybe was unpalatable to viewers. But so I I try to keep my face covered.
Now you've got in the photo. You've got this knowing look in your eye, like you know something about someone's mama or something.
Speaking of smug, I blame it on drinking coffee at a place called Intelligentsia. As I lecture people who criticize me for my little teacup, usually followed with lots of profanity because they're angry that I spoke truth. I just say it's not tea, it's not a teacup, it's a demi-tasse, you Philistine. So that really wins them over.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm curious. How did you find Ricochet, or did Ricochet find you? How did that all come about?
In a way, Ricochet found me. I think the very early on, there was a great article there, and I can't remember who it was by, like right when they started, their first month or something. Mm-hmm. And it was probably like a Rob Long or Peter Robinson article, and I shared it. And they reached out to me and just talked, hey, we'd love you to be there and join. And so I was kind of involved in that very, the first 6 months or so.
Oh, okay.
And then, but then later on, but I wasn't, really actively contributing. I then left the private sector and started working, as you mentioned, for the Goldwater Institute, which is a state-based think tank. I live in the Phoenix area, and limited government, wonderful place. And I learned a lot about policy from the ground up there. And after 2 years there, I decided to try my hand out at writing, and let's see if I can make a go of this. And later on, when Molly Hemingway moved from, she was an editor at Ricochet, and she moved to the Federalist, she contacted me and said, hey, I think you'd be a great fit to replace me. So the rest is legend in history.
You go. Right. What's the most time-consuming aspect of your job, keeping the trains running on time at Ricochet?
Gosh, time-consuming, I would say the main thing, but being kind of a sick individual, I enjoy it, is the editing, the copy editing.
Oh, okay.
So anytime, you'll have a member post that's recommended by a bunch of people, so it gets put on the front page. I get submitted articles over email, or, people just put them into pending and have me edit. What's strange about me is I enjoy writing. I enjoy the big picture stuff, but something I love is fine-tuning things. And
that's masochistic, isn't it?
Oh, I know. And my wife's the same way. And we were so proud when our eldest daughter, we were at a movie theater watching the credits, and our eldest daughter pointed out, that's a typo. I think she was like 5 years old, and she was completely correct. And we were like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you. You're just as annoying as your parents. So, and also I've done a lot of graphic design in my past as well. And what I enjoyed most about that was just the detail work, just fine-tuning things. And our contributors at Ricochet, and this includes all our members, most of our main feed are member posts about all sorts of subjects. Yeah. But they're so smart, it's usually I don't have to edit content. I just have to, we put the period before the end quote, and, just these little tweaks of style that I need to do. But I love doing that stuff. So that's probably the most time-consuming part, but it's not a bad part, definitely.
I should tell you that I've had a love-hate relationship with editors over the last 3 decades. And when I was writing history books for the Air Force, it seemed that every field grade officer on the base got a swing at my work, if it provided they had taken an English comp class at some point.
Right.
And by the time they were all done with it, the thing ended up like it had been edited by Lizzie Borden. But you guys, by contrast, take a much lighter touch, which I appreciate. Is there? I guess you already said it. Your philosophy is just kind of let the writing go where it goes, as long as we're grammatically on board.
And that's my thing too. It's and maybe because I kind of come from the blogging days, but it's all about having a personal voice. And we don't want at Ricochet, we want a Dave article to sound like Dave, and we want my articles to sound like me. And one of the things that's so wonderful, and I kind of rattle on constantly about this, but we will get these posts on Ricochet. You'll have politics, and here's the latest with Trump, and here's what's going on in the Middle East. And then you'll get an article, hey, my job, I work in concrete. Here's how I do my job.
Right, yeah.
Those blow me away because, okay, I know nothing about the subject, and they will just tell me all these things that I've always wondered about that I never knew. And it's important in those things to get the writer's voice. They put their blood, sweat, and tears to it as much as anybody writing an article, some professional writer for the New Yorker or something. especially someone who isn't writing all day for a job, and they're usually far more interesting than something you would find in the New Yorker because it's a different perspective. So you have people not only from all over the country and the much benighted flyover country in which I reside, but people in different countries just telling their experience, saying, hey, I'm from Cambodia. Here's a festival I just attended. Just these kind of random things interspersed with the news of the day, the outrage of the day that everyone's talking about on Twitter, all the talking heads are chattering about. You get kind of a fuller picture of how deep so many people are sharing about all these different subjects that never get any airtime.
Well, and when I was talking with Rob Long just before Christmas, and he said that whenever he sees a post like that from someone that does is really what you would not expect to read about, but they're fascinating posts and articles about their line of work, and he will forward those to somebody at Fox or wherever that he thinks that they might benefit from listening to someone who knows what they're talking about a given subject.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of what I see as well. I think part of it too is when I left Goldwater Institute, a lot of people encouraged me, hey, you got to work in D.C. A few people said Austin, which I guess I could see myself doing for Texas government, but they're like, there's all these jobs available with think tanks and this group and that group and media. But anytime I get to D.C., it's first day is fine. Second night, as I was going to bed, night number 2, I'm like, what on earth am I doing here? This place is driving me crazy. And a big reason I didn't want to relocate there is like you just get into this groupthink. Everybody talks about the same things. You have the same perspective.
Right.
And I just love seeing a perspective, talking to a guy, my bar is the coffee house, talking to some kid at a coffee house about, okay, I'm working 3 jobs and going to college, or you're chatting with the owners. You got to get in good with the owners so you get the nice special deals, but chatting with them about business and balancing the books and how they want to expand or how the city's breathing down their neck. I just love that kind of information, and you're not going to get that if you're in this rarefied world of think tanks and media organization and everybody trying to impress each other by how influential and important they are.
Yeah, you reach a point where you want to drive a railroad spike through your ears.
Right.
I get that. Believe me, I understand.
Yeah, I think part of it too, and you probably see it where you are, but I'm a kid in the West. We moved to Phoenix, the Phoenix area, when I was 6 years old. And when you drive from Phoenix to another city in Arizona, say Flagstaff, which is like a couple hours away, a couple hours north, mountains, pine trees, not what you would expect from Arizona. But you leave one city and then there's nothing. Wide open country for miles and miles and miles. And you might see a house here, a ranch over there, but just those wide open spaces.
Sure.
And I can't get that on the East Coast anywhere. And I think I really my brain starts rotting if I have to be in D.C. or New York for a week. I just start going stir crazy.
Yeah, you can't even get a wide open table at the restaurant.
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
Do you have a certain vision or goal toward which you'd like to move Ricochet? And I don't mean so much an ideological focus, although if that's the case, it's fine. But in terms of technological upgrades or anything like that, any things you see on the horizon that we're trying to get to?
Yeah, I think one thing that's been great about Ricochet is just changing with the times, integrating the best changes, keeping the good content, but improving the website just from a technical perspective. One advantage we have is the flagship, the main Ricochet podcast. Gosh, I don't know when that started. 7 years ago? It's been going forever, but it was really way ahead of the game podcast-wise. Yeah. So as a result, we've kind of established this podcast empire, which is great to see, getting more voices out there, different kinds of voices. And again, you'll get the inside the Beltway voices, but then you get voices from entertainment and all these different areas, which is fantastic. Another real big advantage of Ricochet that I think is going to be more and more important over time is, in a way, it's kind of a social media network. And when you see Facebook really hitting a lot of inquiries and questions, Twitter, which I'm still on, but I just tweeted something about an hour ago, but I hadn't been on for 2 days just because just people calling you stupid. No, you're stupid. No, you're stupid. And yeah, so it's just
you're a Nazi, by the way. I just checked on Twitter. You're a Nazi.
Right. So it's not very valuable.
Yeah.
And Ricochet, in a way, is kind of morphing into its own social network where you can follow people, keep up with your friends. When your buddy writes a post, you get a little notification. Oh, he wrote something. I want to be sure to read it and comment on it. Private messages between members. You can have interest groups, whether it's books or sports or whatever it might be. So seeing that develop over time, I think, is going to be very interesting because it's a situation where we aren't selling data. We aren't throttling coverage if we disagree with your opinions. We aren't. I'm trying to think of all these different things that Facebook does. Every time I go into Facebook, it's like the same 3 people are at the top every time. I'm like, why are these? It's like I don't see my family members, but for some reason, these random 3 people they want me to interact with. Yeah. So that's really something we've been developing as well.
Now, when Ricochet first opened the doors, the model, as I understood it, was one in which contributors would post their columns and ideas and such, and the members would comment and have a conversation with those contributors and amongst themselves as well. That model is still in play to some extent, right?
Yeah, it definitely is, and we highly encourage. There's a few contributors we beg them to interact. And they don't interact, but we do the best we can with it, but the conversation is really the key, just being able to discuss. And, obviously we're a center-right community, so you have that kind of filtering of people who want to be members tend to be right of center. But among the right of center, you have people, a great thing, we used to run polls during the primary, and it was all over the place who was leading at a given time. So we had people supporting every single candidate out there. We have libertarians, we have traditionalists, we have, kind of more, I guess you would say, the think tank intellectual type conservative who have read about all these great minds in history. You have other people who are just like, no, I mostly agree with the Republicans, and that's why I'm on the right. So you have people from all different perspectives kind of hashing things out, not only about current events, but the future of the party. And it's really good to hear. One thing that we saw, too, during the primary is a lot of websites went, we are 100% for Trump, we are 100% never Trump. Yeah. And that's something that pretty much everybody in management hostily resisted. It's just like, no, we are both. I want to hear from someone who says the latest thing Trump did with X is brilliant, and someone saying, no, it's the worst thing in the world, and hash it out, because, that's what we're here for. We're here to discuss, and you don't need to flame each other for having a different opinion. Part of it, too, it might just be my childhood, my family, brother and sister and mom and dad were split down the middle. Half were hardcore Democrats, half were hardcore conservatives, meaning me and my dad and no one else. Right. And my dad and mom constantly canceled out each other's votes in every election. Sometimes my dad would ask my mom, hey, who are you voting for this county commissioner? And she'd tell him, he's like, good, I'll vote against that guy. So, but it was, at the end of the day, we would all have these knockdown, drag out arguments about something, and then we'd end up laughing about it and having fun. So I just love hearing different perspectives, and because I know that half the opinions I have, they might be wrong. My opinions have changed over time, so I want to hear opposing opinions so I can broaden my knowledge. And if I write an article and somebody totally disagrees with it, there's a good chance I didn't explain myself well. Right. I might be completely wrong, but that's very doubtful, of course, because I'm so brilliant. But
and self-deprecating, too.
Maybe I wrote a lousy piece, and I have to account for that. So it kind of keeps you in check.
Well, and we pride ourselves on Ricochet as a place for civil conversation. I remember when Rush Limbaugh commented on Ricochet on his show, and he said it is, quote, literally the smartest people in the room. And I can't disagree with him there. But how are we doing, given this interplay between two different sides of the GOP? How are we doing on Ricochet in terms of the civility side of things?
I think we're doing pretty well. We've had flare-ups here and there. People will take a comment personally, but overall, our members have just been great about it. And once again, we have people on there who could be described as never Trump, and we have other people who are, as they say on Twitter, #MAGA. And most of us get along great. And part of it, too, it's like real life. We all have people in our families and our friends who disagree a lot more than I'm this kind of Republican versus that kind of Republican. You have the crazy uncle who thinks Bernie was way too right-wing. You have someone else who thinks,
guy.
Yeah, you have another buddy who's just bought land and outside of Kingman, Arizona, where he's building a bunker. You have all sorts of people that you run across and usually get along great. And kind of, too, as people talk about, oh my gosh, the country's so divided. Yeah, but when you go about your daily life, you see different politics, you see different genders, different races, different sexual orientations. Everybody pretty manages pretty well. People aren't fighting in the streets. They're usually like, hey, how you doing? And nice to each other and hold the door open for people. And it's not this horrible dissent. And I think Ricochet, a lot of times on the internet, anonymity is the big killer. It can really just let people vent and not use basic human manners.
Right.
And Ricochet really tries to break that down. And sometimes we'll have to kind of edit if a conversation gets a little dicey, we will moderate and try to gentle the waters. But one thing, it's kind of a balancing act because you don't want it to be namby-pamby and dull and boring and have nobody disagreeing. But, conservatism was founded on a very, very robust debate. And you can get angry, you can get frustrated sometimes, you can argue passionately for your position. But as long as we're discussing ideas and not getting into your mama so ugly kind of comments,
right.
We're good to go. And the Ricochet members are great about that.
Well, that touches on something more that I'll dwell on a little bit more or more in depth after the break, but I'm curious about your opinion. Has the arrival of President Trump on the political scene and in the Oval Office, most importantly, has that forever altered the relationship between various segments of the American right, or was the fissure already there and it's just more pronounced at this point?
I think it was already there, and it is more pronounced at this point. You have it's kind of frustrating. I was Republican until 2016 when I finally left the party, but I had been tempted to leave for a long time. It's very difficult to try to find the way out for the Republican Party because this is a party that has promised, we are anti-abortion, yet every year Planned Parenthood is funded.
Right.
There's always some reason why they have to vote for, we need to compromise and fund it. They have insisted on lower taxes, and until this year, that hasn't happened, at least not as much as it should. They focused on cutting spending, and that never has and probably never will happen. So you've had politicians promising one thing the day before the election and then delivering something quite different the day after the election. And people throughout the party are frustrated. And I think most Republicans are very frustrated about that. They have different ways of dealing with it. Some is just like, burn it down. I'm sick of this. And other people are like, okay, yeah, they're full of it, but let's work within the system and change it. Neither of those impulses are guaranteed to work. And that's why we hash them out on Ricochet and try to figure out the best way to go forward. But there is a damn good reason people are furious. And I think like people like you and I who don't live in the Beltway, when we visit Washington, every time I visit, there's nicer cars. There's nicer, brand new restaurants. There's construction everywhere. Yeah, and all I think is when I'm walking around there saying, wow, you are really making good use of my money.
Right.
And, if you have someone in an old Rust Belt town, and my family came from a little town called Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, is where my parents are from. Okay. And they have these locks, and iron ore is shipped through those locks. That's kind of the main part of their business. And obviously, so in a way, it's kind of an extension of the Rust Belt. And yeah, I visited a couple of years ago, and it was just made me want to cry, like literally, just looking around, remembering it from when I was a child. And if you have someone living in those towns, visiting Washington and saying, wow, you guys really take good care of yourself, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good reason you and I don't want to rush to work at, Think Tank Inc.
Right.
or one of these type of empires, because you just feel like you're part of the imperial capital. And anyway, I'm rambling.
No, but I get it, though. I mean, they have a lot nicer cups in Washington, coffee cups.
Indeed.
And you'd almost have to give away part of your soul, I guess, to be it. Well, I don't know.
Exactly.
Molly Hemingway pulls it all off pretty well, but I think she's rare.
Yeah. It's very hard not to be kind of subsumed by the system.
Right.
And I know too. It's like I tend to get along with people, and I could see myself. I kind of fast forward in my brain a few years of being there, and I'll kind of pull a couple punches with this guy because I met him over at this lecture and he was a good guy, so I think I'll back off a bit. And and when you start pulling punches, that's one great thing about Molly is if someone attacks her, she doesn't say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I've been mean." She's like, "No, I'm right, and, and I'm going to read you the Riot Act."
Exactly. Yeah, and well, personally, if I lived there, my booze allowance would have to go way up. So, oh well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We're talking with Ricochet editor-in-chief John Gabriel. We'll have some more questions for John in just a moment. But first, this is one of his favorite songs called "Cambridge, California," and it's by the Lilies. Sound like this. Whether you're traveling to Cambridge, or whether you're here in Memphis looking for some killer barbecue, or staying at home, you can still take care of yourself, and you can take care of that smile of yours, too. Look, we all know that when it comes to your health, brushing your teeth is one of the most important parts of the day, and the folks at Quip know that as well, because they've combined dentistry and design to make a better electric toothbrush. Quip is the new electric toothbrush that packs just the right amount of vibrations into a slimmer design at a fraction of the cost of the bulkier traditional electric toothbrushes. And guiding pulses will alert you to when to switch sides, and it'll make brushing just the right amount of effortless. Notice that I called them pulses, because that's essentially what they are. Like I said before, comparing a Quip electric toothbrush with a conventional electric toothbrush is like comparing a Stradivarius with a jackhammer. Now, Quip also comes with a mount that suctions right to your mirror, unsticks to use as a cover for hygienic travel anywhere, whether it's in your gym bag or a carry-on. And because the thing that cleans your mouth should also be clean, Quip's subscription plan refreshes your brush on a dentist-recommended schedule, delivering new brush heads every 3 months for just $5, including free shipping worldwide. Now, Quip is backed by a network of over 10,000 professionals, dental professionals, dentists, hygienists, and dental students. Most toothbrushes now won't get named one of Time Magazine's best inventions of the year, right? Quip did, and you can find out why for yourself. Quip starts at just $25, and if you go to getquip.com/deplorable right now, you'll get your first refill pack free with a Quip electric toothbrush. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/deplorable. As spelled GETQUIP.com/deplorable. Go over there now and check it out. I think John's ordering a new toothbrush, too. John, I was fascinated by a piece that you wrote on Ricochet a few weeks ago, and it was titled, Yes, Anti-Trumpism is a Failure, and it was always destined to be one. And you quoted David Brooks, and I'll quote that section here. It says, quote, "A lot of us never-Trumpers assumed momentum would be on our side as his scandals and incompetences mounted. It hasn't turned out that way. I almost never meet a Trump supporter who has become disillusioned. I often meet Republicans who were once ambivalent, but who now have joined the Trump train. Meanwhile, if Republican never-Trumpers were an army, they'd be freezing their buns off in Valley Forge, tweeting over and over again that these are the times to try men's souls," unquote. What's been the catalyst, in your opinion, for changing the perspective of some of those never-Trumpers?
Well, I think the big thing is just their smugness and self-assuredness hasn't worked. And they're all about trying to figure out what works and what will change the tide. As I mentioned in that piece, is I was a never Trumper throughout the primary and through the election. I was just like, no, bridge too far. Didn't like voting for McCain, didn't like voting for Romney, and now this is a bridge too far. And it just, so the listeners know, I kind of come from what I would call a Western conservative, but the modern term is conservatarian. That's why I named my podcast that. But just limited government, stay out of our life. I don't want to hear about a president. I just want to Cal Coolidge again, just to be quiet, get a couple things done, cut government, and leave me alone. But the second he was elected, I was like, okay, well, that's what the people want. Thank God Hillary isn't in. Let's see. Yeah. Let's make the best of this. He's going to be my president for the next 4 to 8 years, and let's do this. And a lot of them are just like, no, they doubled down, and they kept doing the same thing, mocking his supporters every time he messes up a word, giggling incessantly about it. Anytime Donald Trump sounds like Donald Trump or acts like Donald Trump, they're tut-tutting and how dare he. I don't get the point of that. Yeah, everybody knew all these things about Donald Trump, and they chose him. So how about respecting the people's choice and moving on? You know, I don't know how they think this constant just whining criticism and conspiracy theories and all these kinds of approaches are going to change anyone's minds. It just seems bizarre to me. And if I know a columnist will always say everything Trump did is perfect or everything Trump did is pure evil, I just stop reading them after a while because I'm like, well, I know what you're going to say, right. And you just either love or hate this person. And I don't know, there's presidents that I really respected and admired did wrong stuff all the time, and I called them out on it. And they also did right stuff all the time. Obama didn't give me much of a chance to do it, but when he did certain things like honoring the military here or there, or making the right decision not to flee Afghanistan and the like, I'd have to say, hey, I don't like the guy, but I'm glad his generals or whatever led him into the right decision. And just from the start, it's just like, this is the new president. I'm an American, and I will salute the flag, and I will respect the White House and respect our president. And just kvetching and whining about it for the next 4 years will only guarantee 4 more. And if Trump goes in there, kicks butt, does an awesome job, it's good for everyone. So the primary's over. The general election is over as well. Move on already.
I was a reluctant Trump voter myself, and he was, as far as I was concerned, he was the last resort. But it struck me in 2016 that a last resort was absolutely necessary to guard against electing, the Gambino family back into the White House.
Right.
But I gather, and this may not be a fair question, but I gather there's still some never Trumpers who sort of wish the election had gone the other way. At least I get that impression. Yeah. And I can't get into their heads.
Get that impression. And I think it's people who, again, and we kind of get into this Beltway mentality. I think people have grown very accustomed to being king of the hill and having their sinecures at wherever they work in D.C., and the system has been very good to them, so let's not upset the system. Like Andrew Jackson, I've been going through a history series lately about Jackson. He just scares people because he doesn't play by their rules. And it's like, no, the rules say this is the way that you act in government and this is the way that you do things. And again, Trump will do things wrong sometimes, but they seem offended at his presence, his existence. How dare you crash through our dinner party and mess up the china? So I think there are many of them who did wish that Hillary won because life as they knew it wouldn't change too much. And instead they see that it's going to change quite a bit. And they need to grow up and deal with it, I think is the big reason. One thing is, as I saw the election results come in November, was I was shocked how elated I was that Hillary lost. Just thrilled, because we've been dealing with like you say, the Gambino family for decades.
Right.
And just to see her get her comeuppance was so wonderful. And I know I wrote, like, first thing in the morning, I posted a piece on Ricochet and said, yep, I was one of those jerky never Trumpers, but I can't tell you how happy I was. You guys won. You won fair and square. You kicked butt, and good for you. And let's all kick butt together as a country. So, and yeah, once again, all the doomsaying about Trump, most of all, he's done a pretty good job. And yeah, there's Trumpisms here and there. There are things that I'm not thrilled with, but overall, delivered the tax cut, which is good. Wish we could cut spending a little more. Trying to herd Republican Congress is, worse than herding cats. But in international diplomacy, too, just some of the things he did. Getting North Korea, we don't trust North Korea in the slightest, of course, but at least changing our perspective with them, hopefully getting them to the negotiation table, moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, things like that people have been talking about for years. It's good to see someone finally do what he said he was going to do during the campaign season.
Well, and that's the thing. What you were talking about before the break about how folks would promise and promise and promise and not deliver. And you just mentioned how comfortable many of these people had been and how life was good and they were happy just to keep coasting along. And I don't think that they understand or understood that there is such a thing as a tipping point. And that the folks out here could see things slipping away. And there's a point beyond which there are no more exits on the highway. You are sunk. Mm-hmm. And so in that respect, I think that's how they got Trump, was in part because of that sort of attitude and the empty promises and then the condescending to the people that actually believe those promises. So.
Yeah, and I think part of it, too, is politicians I've always kind of had a healthy contempt of in general. But at some point, you just need to say, okay, everyone out of the pool.
Right. Yeah.
And that's, you got to be the dad in the front of the car because the voters are the drivers. We're the ones in the front of the car. The politicians are mere employees. And you got to be the dad on the road trip leaning back and saying, don't make me pull this car over. And finally, I know I was a little jerk on long family trips, a little hyperactive kid. And my dad would have to, okay, I'm actually pulling over and let me get my belt. And that's what the voters did to the politicians. And it was long overdue. Yeah. I might have preferred, let's get Cruz in because he's a more committed conservative and he studied the Constitution for years. But again, I think Trump was one of these, okay, we're sick of all you elites in Washington, D.C. You guys need a complete attitude adjustment.
Right, I agree. Now, but let's look at it conversely and change gears for a second because today Jonah Goldberg's new book, Suicide of the West, is coming out, and I'll be grabbing a copy of that and diving into it. And I assume that he will make the warning as he's made before and others have made, that while we may dismiss some of Trump's critics as a collection of eggheads, who gratify themselves with intellectual exercises and spin their hypothetical wheels all over the playground, but we would be foolish, he contends, and others do, and even suicidal, to ignore or denigrate the intellectual and philosophical foundations of Western culture and American conservative thought in particular. In other words, so ideas matter even if they don't fit on a bumper sticker or if they're ideas that maybe President Trump may or may not understand. Do you think that there's a risk in the current attitude of a sort of reflexive anti-intellectualism on the right?
I think there definitely is. And I think one of the most amazing things that Trump has done, like for the courts, kind of deferring, this is what I wish more politicians would do, deferring to the experts in the Federalist Society. That's how they got Gorsuch in there, who's a real game changer on the court. And hopefully we will have more conservative justices sent to the Supreme Court as well. But I think it's important, and it's not everyone's game. Everyone's busy. If I'm running a concrete business, I'm not going to be spending my time pouring through Locke and Burke and things like that. I have a life, and I have kids, and I have a wife to, keep occupied. Not everybody can devote themselves to intellectual pursuits on that level. However, I think it's important to understand it. Our founding fathers were big readers, and they had read this stuff and understood it to their bones, this classic liberalism. of the individual trumping the state. And I think it's important to keep in mind. So, yeah, like you, I had pre-ordered Jonah's book, so I just got a notification a couple hours back that it's been sent to my Kindle, and I need to get reading it as well. I'm very interested to see his thoughts. I think part of it is people see that many of the experts have failed, but at the same time, we shouldn't throw all experts out. You have a lot of jerky economists who have proposed horrible ideas, and we've really gotten bitten badly by them. But then you have Thomas Sowell,
right?
Who,
Walter Williams.
I wish I could put him in charge of, all our economy, because mostly he would just get government out of the equation, essentially.
Right.
So there are good experts and there are bad experts, but I think people talking down to the voter, talking down to the American people nonstop has had a very negative effect on the impression of the elites or the intellectual class. But as with anything, there are good college professors, there are lousy ones, there are good intellectuals, there are lousy ones. Some come to the right conclusion, some come to the wrong conclusion. So we shouldn't throw them all out as a group, and we should definitely keep an eye towards this great American experiment and understanding the history of it, what happened when we gave too much power to government, or even gave it too little, like before the Constitution when you had the Articles of Confederation. Right. So I think it's very important to keep those things in mind and kind of have a political philosophy behind things.
I agree totally. One final question, sir, and I mean that's besides the question as to whether or not you can convince Cold Stone Creamery to come to Memphis. Please, I'm actively soliciting your help with that. But other than that,
I gained 30 pounds. I kind of helped out their marketing efforts there, and I think I gained 30 pounds because, you could have all the free ice cream you want, and that was an unhealthy place to work.
It's all for the cause, man. It's all for the cause. This is a variation on an old question that's often posed on Ricochet's flagship podcast, but I can't remember hearing your thoughts on it. Ronald Reagan could look out on the horizon and remain optimistic, right? The city on the hill, and he was even enthusiastic about the nation's future and its prospects. Whittaker Chambers, on the other hand, could look out and see the exact opposite. I look out on different days and see different things, and sometimes I hear different voices in my head too, so I just kind of go back and forth. What about you? Are you ultimately optimistic, or are you pessimistic about America's future and how it will look for our kids and our grandkids?
I would say, like you, it depends on the day, but overall, I'm optimistic. By nature, I tend to be an optimist. And I think despite my frustrations with voters in this election or that election, over the grand sweep of history, we tend to choose the right thing. We will dither a while in socialist experiments, but most people understand the real world consequences. I'm definitely concerned about, you'll see some of these protests on campus and concerned about the millennials and so forth. On the other hand, when I've actually chatted with interns at a think tank or young conservatives or young libertarians, I'm like, holy cow, these guys are smarter than I was at their age. So I think there is always a huge group of people, a vast majority out there, what used to be called the silent majority,
right.
But people who are going about their work, doing the right things, playing by the rules, and those people don't get headlines. The people who get headlines are the person with 37 piercings through their face and 7,000 tattoos, and they're inventing new gender categories for themselves. They're the ones who get headlines because they're loud and they're obnoxious. But I think overall I'm pretty optimistic about it. Also, too, I think I'm optimistic in that I don't put my faith in government. I don't put my faith in politics. And if you start looking at politics as the end game, as the left looks at politics as their god, essentially, I would be disheartened. But I don't. I think there's a bigger picture at play here, and I think when I'm hanging out with Americans, right and left, I'm inspired. I enjoy my time, and they aren't trying to shut down speakers or overthrow the government or riot in the streets. They're quietly going about their job, doing the best they can, and I think that's America's strength, is the amount of power that the people have, where despite any kind of crazy socialist experiment Washington might try to shove down our throats, people still have common sense.
And they keep things going. I don't know if you heard just a podcast I did, a conversation with a friend of mine, Bob Lee, He's also a retired military veteran. And when I was working with him, if a colonel came into the office, Bob may or may not stand up. The little asides and things he would throw at the colonel would I was mortified because I had just come over from security forces where everything was very regimented,
Right.
You start your shorts, it's crazy. And here's Bob is just, cracking all kinds of things with the colonels. But when a one-striper or a two-striper would come into the office, Bob would hop up out of his chair. He would come to attention, and he would, sir or ma'am, that poor kid, they didn't know what hit them. And so I asked him, I said, I'm intrigued. What's this about? He said, the people that I'm standing up for are the people that make all these other crazy ideas that these people have work.
Mm-hmm.
They're keeping things going. They're the backbone, and they're the ones that I'm going to defer to and show the greatest amount of deference to.
That's great. That's a fantastic attitude. I still remember I was on submarines in the Navy, and I still remember there were, some lieutenants. They were usually the ROTC guys, not the Academy guys. The Academy guys, they were pretty humble. The ROTC guys would be a little, I'm playing military now. And you would have a lieutenant or whatever, stick up his posterior, right. And it was very formal. And the subs don't do formality very well. We never wear our cool Navy hats or anything like that on board because you're indoors the entire time. But I still remember I was running up a ladder, and I literally bump into an admiral, 3-star admiral. And I was mortified. I was on like my second week on the sub, and I said, "I'm so sorry, sir." And he goes, "Please call me Bob." And I went, okay, this guy, I ended up reading about his history. He's just this great service in Vietnam, and he restructured this sub-squadron, and he did all these amazing things. And that really stuck out to me. I'm like, okay, that's leadership. That's Bob.
Exactly. That's
Admiral
the kind of
Bob. And so you have to respect, and that was his attitude as well, is he, when I talked to some other people's encounters with him after our tour, they were just like, yeah, he was most concerned about staying out of people's way so the work would get done.
Amazing.
He didn't want the formality. He didn't want the protocol. He's like, you are the people doing the work here. So I wish our quote unquote leaders in Washington would have that common sense to understand that it's their job to get out of our way as we make America great again.
Exactly. John, if folks want to find you on the internet and learn more about your activities and things, where might they go?
For shenanigans, Twitter is the place. I'm at EXJON is my name on there. For the rest of it, pop on over to Ricochet, and I always blather on about what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. We'd be happy to have you there.
Absolutely. And if you folks want to find me on the internet, you can come right here to Radio Deplorable and on Ricochet's main page, where I post all sorts of tantrums and meanderings. And I'm going to advertise this very briefly, but you can go to my shiny new website at davecarteronline.com. So you'll see some articles and podcasts, and even a blog where I post a running stream of something or other on a pretty regular basis there. And there's even some Radio Deplorable swag there and on Ricochet as well. John, thanks so much, man. It's been a pleasure having you here today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
It really has been a pleasure for me too, Dave. Thanks for that. You are one of my favorite writers. When one of your articles come in, I stop what I'm doing and read it. Really appreciate your writing and your perspective. And I envy your radio voice, since mine needs a lot of work.
Coffee. The radio voice is all about the coffee. But thank you. You're very kind. I appreciate that. And just come back anytime. Give me a little bit of a heads up. I'll clean the place up and dust the shelves next time. And we'll be ready to go.
Excellent.
With thanks to my guest and special thanks to you, the listener, I am Dave Carter for Radio Deplorable on Ricochet.com.